Hello, friends. In these next 3 episodes, I have an absolutely awesome guest. Cecilia is here. She's also known as that scarlet flycatcher in Tumble, and she has written some of my favorite Little Woman analysis on the internet, and literally inspired me to watch every single version of Jane Eyre ever made. Today we are discussing about a less known chapter in Little Woman called On the Shelf. This chapter centers around Meg and John being new parents, and it does take a toll on both of them. I often feel that from all the sisters, Meg is the one who might be the most hard on herself. Maybe it is because she's the oldest and she feels like she needs to set an example. In part 1, we see Meg being this nice 17-year-old girl, but even then she feels the pressure. There's the pressure from the society and from Aunt Marge to marry a rich man so she can provide to her family. There's even pressure from Jo to marry Laurie. This chapter kind of continues that same narrative. Now we see Meg married and being a mom, but she wants to be a super mom. A lot of modern feminists dismiss Meg because she's not like Jo or Amy. She doesn't have an artistic outlet or a work that she's passionate about. If memory serves me right, in Jo's Boys, Meg did teach children as well, so it is not like she's entirely passive. But we have to remember that at this moment she is a 22-year-old woman who has small toddlers, twins, Daisy and Demi. But as we can see from this chapter, Meg does have similar passion that Jo and Amy, but her passion is to prove to the world that she can be a supermom. It is not just this chapter where we see Meg almost trying to be an overachiever. Another one of those moments is the cherry making scene, which we will discuss more in some other podcast episode. There is an underlying pressure to excel in the things that she does. When I was in, let's say, high school, I was very much like that. It is relatable. We also see this idea in the 19th century where it is seen as weird or odd if father wants to participate raising his children. The Woman series fortunately completely throws this idea out of the window, which we can really see with all the male characters in Little Woman. I do really like the way John wants to be present raising his kids. I have turned some of my episode transcripts into ebooks. Some of them are free and others have a small fee. You can find them at littlewoman.gumroad.com. And if you want paperbacks, those are available on my Amazon store. All the links are in the description. This is a Little Woman podcast, Meg, Marge, and the Supermom Burnout. Would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Me? I've been on Tumblr for a few years now, 2, 3, 4, under the name That Scarlet Flycatcher. And I have been a fan of Little Women since I was 8 or 9 years old. Fell in love with Fritz Bear. He's amazing. And well, I also love John and Meg. And I'm very happy to be here.
What is great about Louisa May Alcott is that she doesn't stop to the happily ever after. She continues. And I think that's one of those things that people kind of don't know about Little Woman, that, people just think like, oh, they get married, their life ends. But that's not the case at all with any of these couples. Yeah, they get married, they have children, and life goes on, and then they still continue learning and growing and do their work.
Yes, in particular, John and Meg, because we get a full more book about them being married. But I think it's something that people are not very comfortable with, because, okay, they got married, happy ending. Oh no, now there's conflict and there's things you need to talk about and a new life together. You need to adjust to this other person that thinks differently, that behaves differently. But I think that that's precisely the most interesting part of John and Meg as characters in this novel, is this aspect. Okay, so what happens, as you say, after the wedding, after happily ever after? How do they manage this? Well, it's true. These spotlights they have, the jelly, the seal, the children, they are all turning around conflict, but the conflict gets resolved always, one way or another, and you get the sense that they love each other even more at the end of it, once they have gone through that conflict and they have resolved it. You think, oh, now they are even closer together than before. They love each other more, and they are more prepared for the future, more comfortable with each other, and that's really sweet. And it's a pity that it's so overlooked.
Yes, and I think it's because most movies, they want to focus on Jo and Laurie, which is not what happens in the book. But definitely when I think about John and Meg, the way their relationship is represented in adaptations, some of the TV shows do a pretty good job. Like, I think the 1978 series actually does a pretty good job with them. And then in the 2017 series, there's the scene with Jelly. And so, yes, I like that. I think the movies don't always have the time for that, but I would much rather see Meg and John having a conflict in a film and then solving it than Jo and Laurie stuff being forced on me.
Yes, but I think an interesting element of those John and Meg storylines is that they focus on the things that we have learned over a century afterwards that are the main points of conflict for couples. That are miscommunication, because the jelly plot is all miscommunication, money, and the raising of children. I was rereading yesterday, and I was like, oh, she's talking about these three things that perhaps it wasn't as known back then, but it is now, that are the biggest sources of conflict in couples. I know it's a very curious thing. I think also people get very focused on a few lines that are shocking, that are not so in line with our modern sensibilities, and forget about the rest. Like when John says, "Oh no, this chapter is horrible because John says that Meg is so young and he has to teach her." Well, yes, that's a bit. But when you read the complete event, the thing that is happening in the chapter, there's such a richness to it, a message, and a point of interest that goes beyond an unfortunate line, or a line that we have a hard time understanding from our current perspective.
Well, it's like those lines that Laurie says when he proposes Jo. Nobody talks about them, and people just think, oh, Laurie is so romantic, and then he literally threatens to kill himself if marry him. So, yeah, people just like to skip the things that they don't like and then focus on things that they find controversial.
Like this idea that they get so focused on that line, it reminds me so much of Emma, Jane Austen's Emma, where there's this line where Miss Knightley, the romantic love interest, is teasing Emma and says, oh, by this or that way, I fell in love with you when you were 13. No, he's a pedophile. And you say, the thing is, if Mr. Knightley meant what you think he's meaning, that is, he was sexually attracted to Emma since she was a teenager and wanted to marry her, there's no plot to the novel. And I think there's a similar thing here with John. And they get this idea with life like that one. She's young, and I need to teach her that he's this cold man, this patriarch, and no, that's not John. John is constantly being defined by his sweet brown eyes and his sweet disposition and his kindness. There's this point when Miss March is going to Washington to take care of Mr. March, and the girls say that John Brooke is so good, he's just so kind. They nickname him Mr. Greatheart.
Yes.
Meg marries Mr. Greatheart.
When I think about it, when it comes to Jane Austen and Louisa May Alcott, they literally lived during this time period when most women married when they were 17 or 16. And men were usually much older because men had to establish themselves in the society so that they did have money enough to support their wives, because women were not allowed to work, have enough money to raise children. So that's why there are these older love interests in their stories, and pretty much every book that was written in the 19th century Bible meant, because that was the reality that these people lived. And we know that Louisa May Alcott in general liked older men. So it shouldn't be that surprising to anyone.
And another thing you mentioned, money and working and such. Another detail that caught my attention, rereading for our talk today, is that John doesn't control the money. Like he doesn't hold the purse strings and gives Meg an allowance, and he keeps the management of the money to himself. No, their money is their money, and they have agreed that Meg has access to it, to all of it, to their bank, as they call it. That's a surprisingly modern thing too, He's like, it's not my money, I work for it, but it's not my money, it's our money. I trust you with it too.
That's why she gets to buy the silk, and then she feels guilty because it is their money. It's not her own money, it's their money. If it was Meg's own money, then there would not have been a conflict, because it would have been her own money. But it was their money for their shared expenses.
That's what makes so poignant the thing where John, he doesn't really complain about it, and he goes, no, I don't need a new greatcoat, and there's all this drama, and Meg is so sorrowful. But then there's this funny bit where she goes downstairs and takes the old grand coat of John and cries and smells it. And I think it captures that dimension of how the very small things can also be the very important things, And so there's, in the same thing mixture, there's drama and there's humor, and then there's the romance. She puts on his new green greatcoat and asks him, "How do you like my new dress?" and we get to the famous sex scenes of Little Women,
which everyone should read if they haven't.
I think the problem there is that as a child, you don't get that there's that subtext there.
I didn't realize that until a couple of years ago when I read about it, that there is actually a sex scene. After that, I started to read Little Women more in depth and tried to find other sex scenes, and there are quite a few with sexual undertones, so that's another interesting layer about Louisa May Alcott, that she would include those things into what we consider as a children's book, but I don't really think it's necessarily a children's book.
I think you can see how popular the first part of Little Women was, because she got away with it.
Yes.
it was like, we cannot tell Luisa May Alcott that she cannot include this in her book. We will not pretend that's not what she's saying there. She's giving us plausible deniability, as they say, but it's clear she's fading to black and say, well, you know what happened there. I don't have to tell you. Also 9 months later, Meg is giving birth to twins.
Yes.
We don't know where they came from. The carrot patch. Rereading. That's not the only time she implies that there was that sort of reconciliation on the plot of On the Shelf, that chapter with the twins. It ends first with a makeout session, because you don't risk destroying a bonnet if you're just giving a peck on the lips. And then it has a very similar fade to black to the chapter of the soup.
Yes.
So there are 2 times. So these people, they fight, but then they think about it, they communicate, they ask for forgiveness, they forgive each other, and then they have makeup sex.
That is so funny. That could be turned into a John and Meg rom-com quite easily.
Yes, it's very, very 1950s sitcom. But the difference that they are not a perfect couple.
Well,
They love each other so much, and they are good to each other. They forgive each other, etc. But they have conflicts. They have problems. There's this bit where Meg, with the Jenny episode, where Meg thinks, oh no, I want to run to my mom's house and tell her everything. And then she was, nobody can know that John is a cruel man. And John's cruelty was making one joke about her jelly. Say, oh, we won't ask you, Scott and I, we won't ask you for jelly. And Meg's like, no, he's a cruel man. or when she's like, oh no, he might hurt Demi. He will ruin my little child. You look at this, it's John. John cannot hurt a fly if he try.
no.
Then he falls asleep, trying to make Demi fall asleep with Demi's fingers around his finger. And that's, again, very sweet, but also very lifelike, that parents trying to make their children fall asleep and falling asleep themselves. I think it's very charming.
Yes, I agree. And I think when it comes to Meg's character, and the reason why they do have these conflicts in the beginning, they haven't been married that long. I think from all the 4 sisters, Meg was somebody who demanded most of herself. So she wants to be a perfect housewife, a perfect wife, perfect mother. And, her desire to be a perfect mother is what this chapter is really about. But then she realizes that there is not a perfect wife or a perfect mother or a perfect husband. So it's really a learning process for her and for John as well.
I think the thing with Meg is that when Amy and Joel have these ideas of excellency, of becoming a great writer or a great painter, they're based on aspirations. I might become a great painter, I might become a great writer, but Meg thinks I have to be the best wife.
Yes.
It's an obligation. It's not an aspiration. And I have to do it all alone, all by myself, as the song goes. And it's not true. She cannot do it all by herself. And that's also, I think, such an interesting plot for a mom in a story, for a wife and a mother in a story. You pick up, say, modern comedies about married women, And there's never a point of, oh no, the problem is that you need help. You cannot do it this all alone. It's not possible. No, it's, and now I was thinking, fashion intern. There's fashion intern. There's this movie with Anne Hathaway, and she's a very successful woman, and her husband is a homemaker, and they have a children. And part of the plot is, she works so much, and he feels so emasculated by the life he leads that he goes on to cheat on her. We have still this pervasive idea that it's only a woman's responsibility to raise children, and also this idea that she has to be able to do it all herself, to be successful, to have a job, to take care of the house, to take care of the children, to take care of their groceries. So the fact that this stresses Meg cannot do it all. She cannot take care of her children and make a home for her husband and also make all the groceries and the food. She cannot. She needs help. And then so when Mary talks to her, she says, you need to accept Hannah. Call Hannah. Hannah can come here and take care of your children while you take care of yourself. That's so refreshing.
Yes, I agree. And it's such a good inspirational message to all the readers. And I think it kind of parallels with Jo, because Jo is always like, I don't need anyone to help me. I need to do everything by myself. But then she does need the people to help her. And then she becomes a better person when she realizes that nobody is going to judge her if she's going to ask for help.
Yes, and it would be good to see more in media, in stories, but we don't. It's a pity.
There's to be a trend that people are portrayed to be self-reliant and not needing anyone, but that is not healthy.
Yeah, there's an element of that, and there's also an element that, as children are a choice, therefore it's your choice. I don't have to help you. You chose to have children. You deal with it. That sort of mentality is very strange to me, because it's like you have a choice, and your choice is good, of course. The choice is good, but if you do that, don't count on me. It's really strange. I think all people need help with whatever they need help. We shouldn't deny it on the basis that, they make that choice, now deal with the consequences of it. Like we don't do that with, people who go to prison and then need rehabilitation. We all agree, they deserve a chance, they deserve a job, everyone deserves to get a job and the necessities of life. We don't say, deal with it. It was your choice. Don't come to me.
Well, it also shows the difference in our culture today and then what it was in the Victorian times. Because on one hand, we should be grateful that we have a choice, but then people should not be blamed for their choices.
I have this idea, we need to support people's choices in a more dedicated way. There's this with moms in particular, I feel like there's this idea, I can't. Like seeing what I'm trying to say is like seeing women that, want to do a lot of things, want to work and want to have their children, which I think is one thing we have discussed before about Little Women 2019, Greta Gerwig's adaptation. This idea you cannot have it all. A man can have it all. A man can have his job and he can have a family and he can have children. Nobody makes a story about how we have this pervasive message. Well, you have to choose. You cannot have it all. You cannot have a career and a family and people with you.
I did read somebody making this article that what Gerwig portrayed in her film, it was such an old-fashioned idea because you don't need that kind of message in this day and age because most women are able to combine work, family, and career. And Greta Gerwig herself is married. She has a child, and she's a director. So why would you go to promote your woke feminism, I guess? Or maybe it was just because of the money. But it feels a really outdated idea because all of these ladies in Little Women, I think, especially with Amy and Jo, they do manage to combine the career and family. So I don't know what the problem is.
That is particularly interesting from Little Women, that it's saying that the 1860s, 1870s, it's saying you can have it. You can have a family and you can be a successful writer, as Jo becomes in Jo's voice. You can have both things. What you need is people to help you.
Exactly.
You need your friends, your family, and others. Today we'd say, well, governments should help too, but we get this idea that, well, you can do it, but to do it you need help. You're not Superman, and it's okay to need that help, and it doesn't make you a failure. That I think that's what Meg fears the most when she's married. Oh no, if I call Hannah to help me with Jelly, I have failed as a homemaker. If I cannot take care of my children myself alone, then I have failed as a mother. That's not how that works. I think that's the message Luisa May Alcott is saying there. And there's a lot of value to it. So it's a missed opportunity for so many adaptations. Say, oh no, Meg is the boring one, the old-fashioned one. Her storylines have nothing to say to us modern readers or modern watchers of media.
I think part of that is because most people read Little Women when they are children, and then they can't identify with Meg like they can with Jo. And I'd say this definitely happened to me, that when I have been reading Little Women as an adult, I think that Meg's character arc is one of the most interesting ones. But I would not have seen those things as a child, of course.
I think a lot of the damage, if you will, done to the stories that really most people read it in Good Wives as a single volume and read it as children. Like how different perception would be if they were to read part 1 and they are, I don't know, 9, 10, 12, and then read Good Wives when they're 15, 16, 17.
Yeah, that's what I did.
And I think that's you said, well, we can talk about translation. And I think in most places in translation, that's more likely to happen. At least in Spanish, we have the books, the 2 parts as separate books. They were translated and sold that way. I think that helps.
Yeah, I agree. I think now they publish the 2 books as one here in Finland. But definitely when I was a child, it was always Little Women Part 1 and Little Women Part 2. And I would read them as separate books. And for the longest time, Little Women Part 2 was my favorite book of all times. And people are always very surprised when I say that I always liked Part 2 more than Part 1. I understand if you are a child and you are very attached to Part 1. I was so attached to Part 2 as a teenager. It was one of my favorites for the longest time. But then I really love Little Man as well, and Jo's Boys. But Little Man, it was another book that I read so many times as a teenager. And I don't really see that as a children's book either, because it has all the making out scenes with Jo and Fritz. But it has so many societal themes like child abandonment and female education and stuff like that. It's really amazing.
There's that element of reading it in childhood and not getting most of the things Luisa May Alcott is trying to say and doing in Part 2, that that also influences the way adaptations are made and were made, since there is cinema mostly, because most adaptations are, oh, so we are going to dedicate all this time to part one, and so we'll sprinkle a little part two there in the end to say we adapted it and call it a day. Like you see, I think it's most evident in the 2017 PBS miniseries, that it's 3 hours long and 2 hours are exclusively dedicated to part one.
Yes.
This second episode ends with Meg's wedding, and it's like, oh, okay, we'll give you an episode of part two, okay. And that's always so strange to me, but because, yeah, part two was always my favorite part two. Like part one, you get these girls that don't have really much freedom of movement at all. They are all the oldest ones. When one goes to Mrs. King's to be a governess, and Jo goes to Aunt March's, but their world is very small, and there are few things they can do. Jo cannot go to war. She wants to go to war. She cannot go to war. Then Laurie suggests to go to Washington, and she's, no, I cannot go with you to Washington. What are you thinking about? And neither of them can go to Washington. They have to stay home and wait. So when in part two, Amy goes to Europe and Jo goes to New York, and even Beth, that we mostly see at home, gets to go to Meg's house and help her with things. So there's this sense that the world is opening up to them, that the future is bright. There will be sorrows, there will be troubles and problems, but there's this strong sense of hope for the future, and this idea that life can surprise you in amazing ways.
Yes.
So I love that about part two. I discovered that's not a very common thing.
I know. Well, good thing we have this podcast. I can hopefully introduce people to read part two more in depth. I love it because it shows so much of the inner growth of the characters. And one of the things that I like the most is Laurie's character arc that nobody talks about. I actually read part one again last summer, and I noticed that the chapters that I enjoyed the most this time were all about Meg. I love the Vanity Fair, and then Camp Lawrence, when John tells the story about, no, not John, but like they're telling the story together, and he clearly shows interest in Meg. He tells this story of where he is a prince and Meg is a princess.
He's at night and he wants to free the princess, but he has no money. He's traveled the world. It's so dramatic. Like, they can both be so dramatic. Both of them. And that story, like, he's lying on the grass and talking about, oh no, it's so sad. There's my princess in the tower and I cannot rescue her. And I think that comes nicely together on the last chapter of part one, when John tries to make Meg tell him that she'll try to love him, and then there's Aunt March, because there was not enough drama between those two, jumps in, and it's this all big drama. John is behind the door, being like, I do what I want, and I'm gonna marry John Brooke, you like it or not. And March is, you're going to regret this, young lady. It's to me such a funny chapter.
It is such a funny chapter. I think my favorite version of that is the 1949 film with Aunt March shouting, "You cannot marry that poor man." It's so funny.
And Aunt March changing his surname, and every time he says it, this cook, this rook, this. But things you mentioned about, reading it as an adult, I was noticing last time, reading all these parts, the subtle depth that on March's character gets, even in part one. You know, as a child, you see, oh, she's the party pooper aunt, and you stay at that. But then you reread as an adult, and you see another depth her character, and most of all the loss of Uncle March and of her little girl, and how that's such an important factor in all the things she does. Even in that proposal chapter, there's a throwaway line about how that expression of love for Meg, that similarity of temperament, you know, that they both like, that contradiction, and how Aunt March is remembering something, is remembering when she herself was in love. Those little things, oh, that's why, that explains a lot. So that's one of the things that makes me the most mad about 2019. There's so many things, but if I start ranting, we never end. But they said, yeah, oh, she's a rich spinster. No, she's a widow, and Alfred March existed, and losing him changed her life. There's such a tragedy in that.
Yes, and the way they speak about Uncle March is that Jo worshipped that man. So I think it sort of degrades Jo's character that you kind of erase this person that was very important to her. So I didn't like that at all.
I think that's brilliant because you're just starting the book, and Jo, you have this description of how much Jo remembers Uncle March, his library, that he let her play with his books and make trains, and he always had candy in his pockets. You may forget about it, not pay much attention to it, but then Fritz Bear shows up, and the things we see him do is play with the children in the library. His pockets have candy in them, and you say, oh, that's another parallel between Jo and Aunt March, and Uncle March and Fritz Bear. It's, oh, that was there at the beginning, and it was a throwaway line, mostly.
That shows how Jo has a pretty clear idea what kind of man she finds attractive. But I think she always wanted to be with someone who liked children, definitely. Because Jo wanted to be a mom herself. I think one of the reasons why John doesn't get that much recognition as Laurie and Fredrik do is because he's more of an introvert. I think introverted characters tend to be neglected often. I think same happens with Beth a lot.
But we also know so little about him. Like, is John Brooke an American or is he British? I may have forgotten things from Little Man and Joe's voice. But there's Camp Laurie, there's this conversation he's having with Kate Vaughn and Meg, you know, the one where Meg says she's a governess and Kate looks at her snobbish like, oh, a governess. And John defends her, and then he's talking to Meg, and he says that he has experience and that life as a tutor in America is easier than in Britain, that he has experience of that. And I was like, whoa, so you were in England at some point. We know little about him, really.
Somebody write a John Brooke backstory.
Please, we need to know.
I think it would make sense that if he was from England, because we have Laurie who is half Italian and then Fredrik is from Germany, and Louisa May Alcott, she kind of promotes her ideas of transnationalism with these international marriages. To me, it would be totally fine if he was from England, because that would align with these philosophical ideas of Louisa May Alcott.
And part of you mentioned he's being an introvert. There's this part where Meg remembers something Marmee told her about John, and that Marmee told her, well, we, me, you, we have this sort of anger that boils up and then cools down and it's gone. But he's the sort of person that it takes a lot to make him angry. Very, very much a lot. He's not a person that gets angry, but when he does, it's this very cold and very inward-oriented anger.
Yes.
So she advises her, be the first one to cross the bridge, to forgive and to ask for forgiveness because, So I think that's a very introvert thing. Not necessarily, but, pretty commonly so. Okay, I'll get angry, but I won't scream. I won't get all hot on it. I'll just get very coldly angry and stay there less for a time. It's little details, it's little throwaway lines that tell you things about the character. Lisa Mayalto doesn't really stop down to elaborate in general about people, especially if they are second characters, but there's a richness and a depth that is given by those throwaway lines that I think is very underappreciated.
There's one thing I wanted to ask you, because I see lots of people from South America coming to my podcast. And what I understood, it's a very popular book in South American countries. Do you have a reason for that?
I know that in Argentina and Uruguay, in Argentina, they're in the Spanish-speaking world, and the four big editorial cities where books were made were Madrid, Barcelona, so those two in Spain, and then Mexico City and Buenos Aires in Argentina. Buenos Aires was a powerhouse of editorial houses and publishing and such. For example, the first translation of The Lord of the Rings was made by an Argentinian editorial. And back in the day, there was this very common thing to have collections of books for children. There were two very famous collections. One was the Robin Hood editorial Acme, like the thing from the Looney Tunes, and had this Robin Hood collection that was yellow books with classics.
Yeah, we have those in Finland too, yeah.
Childhood classics.
Yes.
So there was a wide array of choices from Jane Eyre to Robin Hood, Ivanhoe, you name it. And there was Little Women and other works of Luisa May Alcott, A Garland for Girls, Rose in Bloom, Eight Cousins, Joe's Boys and Little Men too. They were published in the collection. Then there was another very similar collection by Bishiken. That was the red books. Bishiken had the red books and Robin Hood had the yellow books. And Little Women and Good Wives and all those stories were also published and by that house. I think it's very known because of that, because those books were cheap and were part of school libraries and public libraries and households even, created the popular culture of children for decades. One thing I came to realize at one point was that there was not a collection of books for boys and books for girls. They were all your yellow books. That there was no expectation, Little Women, it's a book for girls. And then there we have the books for boys, the adventures, the Around the World in 80 Days. Now, it was all part of the same collection. If you wanted to read all the books of the Bishiken collection or all the books of the Robin Hood collection, you were going to read quote-unquote girls' books and quote-unquote boys' books. And I think that was very nice, within books in gender boxes, but also that allowed boys to read Little Women.
I think many of the gender divination books came in around 50s or 40s after the Second World War, at least here in Finland. Publishing history is very interesting. I have my oldest copy of Little Women that I think was published in the late 1920s. And it's a very old translation. One of the first Finnish translations. But I don't think it's a very popular book in Finland. Like, most people know Little Woman through the films. Anne of Green Gables is probably more popular as a book series here.
I only heard about it when I got into the English-speaking side of the internet. But because it was not in the Michigan collection and it was not on the Robin Hood collection. I think it helps that we don't really have anymore, but we used to have a very strong used bookstore culture. So instead of buying books new, if you wanted to read as a child or a teenager, you either used libraries that had books or got your books on second-hand bookstores that will carry these collections predominantly because there were printed so many copies of them. Even nowadays, you can go to a used bookstore and buy Robin Hood collection books. They stopped being in print like in the 70s or the 80s. And they're still in one piece because they were really good editions. My old copy of Joe's Boys is from that same time. You say it's about between 1918 and 1925, I think it is. I should check again.
Sounds good.
I don't read it anymore because I feel like it will fall apart when I open it. It's interesting that divide, that if something it wasn't very published, you wouldn't get familiar with it. The choices of an editorial house were shaped in the past culture for a country, in a way.
That was our chat today. Cecilia and I will continue our discussion next time. Thank you so much for listening. Take care and make good choices. Bye.